We are, for the second time, looking at what was Jeannette before it became Jeannette. I have a background map here of Jeannette as it is today. This red line is the railroad going through. This blue line is Brush Creek. Incidentally, when J. Edgar Thompson engineered the path, the route of the railroad going on into Pittsburgh, he actually followed Brush Creek simply because it was more or less the route of least resistance. He had to negotiate a lot of difficult territory, and Brush Creek had already done that thousands and thousands of years previously. And Thompson was smart enough to follow Brush Creek. Now we're looking at sites that were things that happened before Jeannette was even thought about. Last time, in number 1, we saw the Klingensmiths fort up here in Klingensmiths Mill. This time we're going to take a look at a salt works. There was actually a Klingensmith involved in that too. The Klingensmiths owned almost all the property that Jeannette would eventually be built on. The Klingensmiths and one of the Brickers. Salt became a very important commodity. It was important because they had to travel a good distance to get salt in the early pioneer days. So they would make a trip the whole way to Kentucky to get salt. And then they realized that salt could be obtained locally. And they had to drill down into the earth hundreds of feet to where the salt was located. And then they had to put water down there that would dissolve the salt. That water then had salt dissolved in it would be pumped to the surface. And then the water would have to be boiled away. It was a long process, but they were able to make salt. The location here was along Brush Creek in this area, which is today between Jeannette and Grapeville. This is Grapeville over here, and this is Jeannette. This is Thomas Avenue coming down, coming into Grapeville. John Brown's store was down here once upon a time. We talked about that when we talked about Grapeville. And we move on to an old map. This is mapping from the 1860s. And inasmuch as we see no indication of the salt works or the well where the salt was obtained, we think by that time it had probably already blown up. The old salt well was important for salt, yes, but for another reason, which is somewhat surprising. The salt works, which was in this area right here, right above the railroad, and right between Grapeville and Jeannette. Jeannette wasn't even here yet in the 1860s. The salt well that had been drilled here was in business for a while, and then it mysteriously blew up. It just exploded. And no one knew why. I mean, locals were talking about the vapors from the hellish regions coming to the surface and blowing up. But what they eventually realized after natural gas had been discovered in Murraysville was that it was natural gas coming to the surface that exploded and blew up the old salt works. It was this discovery that tipped the people off that there was natural gas available. The first natural gas well actually was on Klingensmith land, a little bit up this way in the area of the Klingensmith mill that I talked about previously. The natural gas was very important for Jeannette developing. You might say that Jeannette would never have happened if it weren't for natural gas, because for the making of glass, an abundant supply of natural gas was important. Here you have an advertisement for the salt works on Brush Creek. October 1833. Klingensmith, Haney, and Black. These are the guys who are running the salt works. And for 37.5 cents, you could get a bushel of salt at their salt works. This is the salt works that blew up. Now this is Google Earth view of the area we were talking about. This is the railroad going through right here. This is Thomas Avenue coming down that I mentioned. And this is Brush Creek coming down. It comes down and then goes underneath the railroad. And it meanders around, and the railroad follows it. And this is, in a way, an introduction to a little video. And it's also helps us to orient yourself, see where we are. This is Lafferty Street in Jeannette over here. This is Grapeville over here, the road going out to Radabaugh. And I'm going to do a little video from this bridge over top of Brush Creek. The salt well was in this area, over here most likely. Over here there was then later on an extract company, which I'll show you a picture of. And so the next thing you're going to see is going to be a short video. Hang on. We are at Brush Creek as it flows down. Up this way, we look toward Grapeville. And as we turn around, we look toward Jeannette. And from what I can tell, it was over in this area somewhere, and I'm not going to pretend I know exactly where, that the first salt mine was drilled. The salt well was drilled in this area. And there was a big explosion. And they only learned some years later that there was a big explosion because it was natural gas coming out. And that's what told them there was natural gas in the area. And that is what prompted the boom in Jeannette with the glass industry, because they needed a lot of natural gas. And eventually, later on, there was also another company here, an extract company in this area. I don't know what chance there is we can get a much better look. There's probably a very good chance I could get myself run over here if I'm not careful. But this is a look at some of the scenery here where the it's almost like snowing with this stuff coming down from the trees. It's a good thing I'm not allergic. But there was an extract company in this area also. An extract company. And we have here, right here, that's the extract company that once upon a time sat in that area. It's right beside the railroad tracks. This is the main line. You notice it had quite a few more tracks then than it has now. Coming into Jeannette, under the bridge, and this was the Jeannette Railroad Station. And you see the other features here, some of the early houses. This view is from 1897. I like these things. It gives you kind of a snapshot of the way things were at a certain time. As you look at the extract company, you see there's a siding coming up this way. That went up to, there was a glass company up there called Victory Glass. The other thing you can notice, this is Brush Creek coming down. And you can see it's bifurcated here. And as Brush Creek runs now, it just has one channel. And a lot of times the old creeks were the way they were naturally. And it then went under the railroad in a culvert and flowed on down toward Pittsburgh. And this is by way of recap. This is where we started out, showing you the area of the salt well, which blew up in a big explosion, and how it relates to the contemporary map of Jeannette. And we noted that Jeannette wasn't even there yet when this salt well was drilled and operated. And the next time we meet, we'll see Smale's mill over here. They had a sawmill that was driven by water power. We might make a short stop up here at the old house, the old stone house that was built in 1772. And maybe we'll revisit the Fort Klingensmith up here, right by Elliott Company. And I think that's about enough. And we'll see you again. Bye now.